Welcome to the Keep It Organic podcast, a place for gardening thoughts, trends, techniques, and questions from you. I'm your host, Scott from New Garden Road, and after 16 years of organic gardening in Central Texas, I'm ready to spill the beans. I'm an advocate for regional and seasonal produce, saving soil, ecological stewardship, and crop diversity. Today's topic is spring planting in Texas. Let's get into it. It's finally spring, and we passed our last average frost date in Central Texas, so we can plant like crazy, right? Let's fine-tune this a bit. Whether you're new to growing your own food or starting your first Texas garden, you need to be informed about spring planting in Texas. This time of year can feel like early summer at times, so what do we grow? My approach has been based on succession planting from the fall through the winter for early spring production. Crops like broccoli, kale, and cabbage will overwinter nicely when established in the fall, while root crops and leafy greens can be planted throughout the winter. So when we get to March, it may be too late to plant some of those varieties, but we can be harvesting them. I'm going to outline for you what we can plant now, but first, how do we get there? I want to talk about a few resources that you have at your disposal. Number one is the Texas AgriLife Extension Service Planting Guide. This is a planting guide. You don't have to go by it 100%. You can experiment, try new things, but it is a great place to start. And I have used it extensively over the years because it really informs me to know whatever month of the year it is, since we can grow year-round here in Central Texas, what I can plant. Now, if you haven't seen this, I'll drop a link in the show notes and you can check it out for yourself. So historically, what I've done is printed out several copies, and I'll use one each season. I'll use a highlighter and mark on it, write on it, make up my seasonal planting plan, and that gives me something to reference later on. Garden record keeping is really important. You can create your own style, and this is one of the elements that I like to integrate. Now, you can look at this a couple of different ways, but I like to break it down into planting zones and harvest zones because it's really important to understand when the food that you're growing is going to be ready for harvest. Each one of these planting zones has their unique challenges, but since I told you I like to succession plant from the fall through the winter, let's start there. As early as September through the month of December, you can begin planting out some of these cooler season crops. Some of them you may want to start indoors, such as the brassicas, kale, broccoli, cabbage, collards, kohlrabi, things along that line. And for the most part, those will grow slowly as the days get shorter, as the angle of the sun gets steeper on the horizon. They're not going to produce as quickly as, say, a package of seed will tell you. But some of those options you will be able to bring to harvest before the winter begins. Crops like lettuce, the Asian greens, and radishes are really good examples. Now, it can take some work getting through the initial first freeze of the season, but a lot of times we have an extended period of mild temperatures after that. So if you're able to get these crops established and growing, they're going to continue to produce. So this planting zone, September through December, is largely what I've been harvesting off of since the beginning of the year. The next planting zone that I outline is January through February, and it's very interesting when you look at the crop selection. It's virtually the same as the crops that you can plant in the fall and winter months. However, there are some unique challenges this time of year. As the days get longer, many of those cool season crops will be triggered to bolt, and temperatures will fluctuate for us here from, say, 20 degrees to 80 degrees during those months, and it just can be a little bit more of a wild ride. And I always advocate for choosing selections that are faster to produce. So if you're choosing a spring radish that's going to take, say, 30 days over a winter radish that can take 60 days or longer, that would be the way to go. Likewise, if you're going to grow some broccoli, you might be well to pick up a transplant at the nursery versus starting your own seeds, because that's just going to take longer. Now, the next planting zone is the one we're in now. It's March through April, and I'm expecting the crops that I plant right now to be harvesting into early summer. Crops like corn, cucumbers, tomatoes, snap beans, squash, and melons will do best when they're given an opportunity to set fruit prior to the extreme heat of summer. Planting these types of crops right now should land us in an early summer harvest zone, sometime in June, and that's generally one of the most abundant times of year in my garden. These can be tricky with the risk of a late freeze and nighttime temperatures below 50 degrees. However, they're also susceptible to heat and moisture stress, so that's why it's important to get them in early, get them established so they can do their thing. The last couple of summers have been pretty extreme, in my opinion, with high temperatures exceeding 105 for extended periods of time. And what I have discovered is that when I've planted my crops later into the season, even in a succession fashion, they did not do as well when they got to that point in the season. When they're trying to flower and set fruit, it just didn't work out well. One of the reasons is because the pollen of these plants can actually be rendered sterile. This happens when it gets really warm or hot early in the day, and the plants don't have an opportunity to start producing pollen or pollinating. And really, when temperatures exceed 90 degrees, these plants will be stressed in some way, shape, or form. And not to mention, if you're growing some corn or watermelon into the hotter times of year, think about rodents, raccoons, squirrels. These critters will start to get desperate once we begin experiencing drought conditions. And that's usually the point in the season when I start to get a little bit of trouble with them. So the best thing to do is get these crops growing as soon as possible so that we can avoid that situation. Now, I do experiment with planting in the months of May and June, but based on my experience, that's why I'm shifting it in the importance of targeting March through April planting. It may well depend on the individual microclimate in your garden. You could get away with things when you have a little bit of shade, or if you've got a nice shade structure that can help you pull through a bit better. But it's not going to be easy. And like I said, there's going to be anything and everything coming after those tender veggies. However, there is another planting zone we've got to talk about, and that's July through August, where remarkably, we're talking about some of the same crop selection that you have now in March through April. And that just kind of blows my mind because it's very hot during that time of year. It's usually really dry. But nonetheless, when it comes to understanding the days to harvest for these crops, planting them at that time will land them in the later September, October range, which is more ideal for them to mature and set their fruit. It's not easy, but that's how we get it done, and this will actually give us a fall harvest zone. Now that we've calibrated ourselves a bit to growing food here in Central Texas, let's go down the list of what you can plant from seed directly in the garden. Throughout the month of March into April, and I say the sooner the better, you can look at drying beans, snap beans, green beans. Lima beans have really performed well for me historically, as well as long beans, otherwise known as asparagus beans or noodle beans. What about corn and sorghum? You can really get some drama growing in the garden that way. Also, cucumber and cucumber melons. I'm not talking about the cucamelons, those little tiny things. I'm talking about actual cucumber melons. These are immature melons harvested and used just like cucumbers in places like southern Italy, India, and several other places throughout the world. They're really, really good. You can also do gourds, melons, watermelons, muskmelons, and don't forget the tried and true southern summer favorites, okra, southern peas, and squash. Now, there are more seeds that you can plant directly in the garden. Let's talk about greens. It's not going to be lettuce and spinach, some of those all-time favorites that we're really well accustomed to. I'm talking about some different things here, such as callaloo. That's a variety of amaranth. What about New Zealand spinach? Not a true spinach, but pretty tasty. And Malabar spinach. The texture of this one is pretty mucilaginous, and you can use it if you like it. I take the really young leaves and harvest those, eat them raw. The larger ones I'll cut up and saute. I find them to be really delicious. As well as Molokia, otherwise known as Egyptian spinach. This is one powerhouse of a superfood, and it grows like nobody's business through a Texas summer. And don't forget about the flowers. We have a lot of options. These are just a few that I want to sprinkle in here for you because they've done well for me over the years. I'm talking about amaranth, borage, celosia varieties, cosmos, gomphrena. That's going to come back year over year, dropping its seed, and sunflowers. Okay, my all-time favorite, zinnias. Got to bring those to the table. You can cut those, bring them indoors, and they'll last for a week or more. Those are some really great flowers that will draw in biodiversity. You want a range of sizes, and they're just going to put on a show for you, as well as bring in butterflies, hummingbirds, and more. Now, switching over to things that we can transplant directly in the garden. These are going to be little seedlings in a little pot that you get from the nursery, or maybe you've started some things indoors. But I'm talking about eggplants, peppers, tomatoes. The sooner the better. You want to get them in there so they can get growing and fruit for you before it gets hot. Also, more options like tomatillos, Swiss chard. That's another one that can perform really well. It will kind of go dormant into the summer and maybe rebound for you in the fall if you can bring it through. But that's a really nutritious green that you can grow in the garden. Also, longevity spinach. This is also called Gynura. If you can get your hands on some of that, that's a really nutritious green that can establish well and come back perennially. And another one of my all-time favorites, a true southern gem, is sweet potatoes. I want to mention too, real quick, we talked about warm season greens. Sweet potato greens are more nutritious than spinach. Now you're going to plant those from slips, which are essentially sprouts that are grown off of mature sweet potatoes. Also, what about ginger and turmeric rhizomes? You can get some specialty varieties online, or you can pick up organic pieces at your local co-op and get those growing in the ground. They will grow slowly at first, and it's going to take a long time. We're talking about into the fall after the first frost. Then it will be time to harvest some fresh, delicious ginger and turmeric. Grow you some medicine. And we have a variety of herbs that we can get in right now. You can grow some of these from seed, but I always say with the herbs, how many do you want? Do you need 10 oregano plants? Do you need 50 dill plants? Maybe you just want to buy one seedling at the nursery, or you could share some seeds with someone and grow some out yourself. But I'm talking about options like basil, bay leaves, chives, cumin, epazote, fenugreek. That's a really interesting one, as well as lavender, lemongrass. We're pretty familiar with those. All kinds of mint varieties that you can choose from out there, and those will grow really well throughout the season, as well as marjoram, oregano, rosemary, sage, sesame. You might not have tried that one yet, and thyme. Okay, now a lot of those are great to establish this time of year. Some of them, like the Mediterranean herbs, you can get growing and they will become perennial. They will last throughout many years and you'll have to maintain them. But this is such a joy for me to go out in the garden in the morning and grab some fresh herbs with all those vital oils, put them in a little bit of a breakfast saute or whatever I've got going on for the day. And that can be really nourishing. One thing that I'm really excited to bring to you in this podcast is questions from the audience. We can learn so much from one another. I really enjoy hearing question and answer sessions on different platforms and at local presentations that I go to throughout the year. You just don't think of everything, and you can hear it from a different angle, learn some new techniques. Whatever it is, you should expose yourself to various forms of knowledge. So today I have 5 questions that I want to share with you from my YouTube community tab. All right, our first question comes from the Plant Ninja, Texas Gardener. Help us understand different soil mixes and how to choose one. This is a great question, and the first thing I would distinguish is between garden soil and potting soil. That being said, I want you to understand that potting soil is a bit of a misnomer because potting soils or container soils really should be soil-less. And the reason is because if they have soil in them, or if you use garden soil to plant in containers and pots, particularly on the smaller size, generally below 20 gallons, you will get compaction. So garden soil does not do well in containers and pots because that compaction will prevent the roots from really flourishing. They won't be able to breathe. You won't have good moisture transfer. And over time, your plants are going to become unhealthy. That being said, we can call it potting soil all day long. I think that's what most of us call it. Also, these potting soils are generally more expensive, so it's not real economical to use them in a raised bed garden or as a soil amendment. Plus, they have lighter elements such as perlite, which in a really strong wind, without a layer of mulch, could start to blow away pretty easily. So, it wouldn't be wrong to use potting soil in our raised beds or our garden plantings. And that's what we have essentially when we're planting out transplants. Another contrast we can make is between the potting soil and a seed starting mix. Seed starting mixes are going to be similar to potting soils, but they will have a more finely screened substrate. So you have less chunky material in there, and that really helps seedlings go on to sprout and get growing without any kind of impediments. So it wouldn't be uncommon or wrong to have potting soil and seed starting soil in the garden, but you don't want garden soil in your containers or your pots. Now, you also may see products labeled as rose soil or cactus and succulent mix. These products generally contain more mineral content, they have better drainage, and that's something that roses and the like will appreciate. The thing to remember is you can add aggregates, minerals, rocks to your existing medium and increase the drainage, generally in the order of 25 to 40%, and that would make them more suitable for cactus, succulents, and even roses. But still, understand the differentiation between pots and gardens. All right, really great question. Whatever you choose, whatever you end up using, remember it's not a one and done. You want to nurture that soil, treat the soil like a plant. The soil should be a living thing, and that's going to be what helps your plants be healthy and strong. Okay, so adding compost seasonally is really important, maintaining it, keeping it mulched. You just got to take care of it like you take care of plants. Second question comes from @Durgo. What are some common ways to help reduce the cost of starting a garden and maintaining a garden? I know when I started, I overspent a bit. I bought a few Vago garden planters, which are really nice, and I like a lot, but I think I should have toned it down a bit when I started. Getting a jigsaw and some 2x4s to start some square foot gardening beds helped me a lot. Yeah, so I'm with you there. I'm all on board with, utilizing free and available resources. The leaves that fall from the trees seasonally are a fantastic soil amendment. We can make compost at home. If you have if you live in an apartment or on a balcony, you can look into bokashi. That is a really great way to essentially ferment your kitchen scraps, but you can use that as a soil amendment too. So all of these things are considered nutrient cycling, and they do take time. They may take some practice, but that's all that it costs you. It doesn't, cost you any money up front. And regardless, this is probably the best way to approach taking care of your soil in your garden. I also want to mention elements like aged wood chips. Now, these can be a free and readily available resource if you are in connection with a local arborist. Otherwise, you could seek out chipdrop.com. I had about 40 to 50 yards of fresh wood chips dropped in my property, and I use those in my pathways. But likewise, you can make a big pile, let them age over the course of a year, and they will really break down into a fine material. You'll have lots of fungal organisms working in there, and that can be a great soil amendment after it is well aged. Also, I encourage you to study things like natural farming or Korean natural farming. This can empower you with the ability to create your own inputs for various types of plants from the plants that you're growing. You can collect indigenous microorganisms on your property. You can scale those up, and that can be a really healthy way to establish a vigorous garden. And again, it's just going to cost you some sweat equity. Also, study the soil food web. There's a lot of great information online. I like the Soil Biology Primer. If you Google that, there's a PDF by the NRCS. It's got a lot of great info. It will give you some insight and some ideas for how to approach nurturing your property, your soil, and in turn, it's going to be cost effective because what you'll find is it's about nurturing the existing ecosystem that you have. And lastly, learn to select and save seeds. My favorite Southern pea is the Big Red Ripper, and I haven't bought those for about 5 years. That's when I bought the first pack. I've been saving them season after season, and if you look at them closely and you identify plants that grow more vigorously, are more resistant to pests, produce better, if you put some tape on those or flag them somehow, save those seeds, and do the same thing season after season, you'll end up with a really strong variety. And that's just one example, but if you learn to save seeds and select for the greatest attributes, man, you're coming up with something really powerful and you don't have to spend any money on it. I hope that helps. All right, here we go. Next question from Still on Track. Any tips for keeping ants from inhabiting raised beds? This is a tough one, really, because me personally, I try to live with them as much as possible. I know that's not reasonable in every circumstance. This is a risk. They can be really painful, and if you have pets or small children, it can be, somewhat serious. However, in the garden, what I've observed over the years is they are migratory, meaning they'll pop up after really heavy rains. They'll calm down after a bit. They'll come up somewhere else, and they may inhabit a space for an extended period of time, but in my experience, eventually they do move. And that also points to the fact that they are a vast underground network. So it's not as simple as knocking out the mound of ants that are in your garden, because they are all underneath your garden in the subterranean network that they created. So very difficult to approach. However, I do have some ideas. You could mimic a heavy rain by giving a really slow, deep soaking to that garden bed. Probably something on a drip would work really well over several hours, maybe even overnight. And that would probably encourage them to move on, because that home, that mound that they've cultivated there wouldn't be suitable for them any longer. So, they may just move to another area in the garden. But it's worth a shot, something to experiment with. Now, I know you mentioned also diatomaceous earth. That one can be tricky because it may have some negative effects on some of the beneficial insects in our garden. It also really only works as a deterrent in my experience. It does have the capacity to cause, hard-bodied insects to desiccate, which would eliminate them. However, in the case of ants, like I said, what we're seeing is the tip of the iceberg. So diatomaceous earth works as a deterrent around, specific plants in certain circumstances, but not the most effective treatment. And physical barriers are not really likely to work because ants are so versatile in their movements. They can really get over stuff. If they want to make a home somewhere, they are going to make a home there. But I think you touched on something in your extended comments about beneficial nematodes. Now, this is a biological control that I have used. Now, these are microscopic roundworms. They work in the soil. They feed on larvae. So fire ants or ants in general would be something on their list. And I think that is a really good way to go. But I'll tell you, it may require repeat applications. So you got to be in it to win it. And just be aware that they may come back. The next question is from Suburb Heavens. How to protect direct sown seedlings from being eaten by pests? Now, this is a really great question because we're going to have a lot of adversaries out here in the garden, particularly going into the warmer season. The first thing that I would point to is a physical barrier. The old timers, they used to use old tuna cans or even cardboard to make a ring around some of their plants after they planted them in the garden when they were really young and tender. And this would help to form a barrier against cutworms. So that can be really effective. But you can also look at physically removing them, being observant in the garden, especially when you have just planted things or you have seeds popping up. It's a really critical time. And going out there, you can take insects, drop them in a bucket of soapy water, remove them, put them to another area of your garden. That can be really useful. And I know we were just talking about diatomaceous earth in the previous question. That's honestly probably one of my go-to products for, seed sprouting. I like to direct seed in the garden right now. I've got some southern peas, some cucumbers, some melons, some corn coming up, and I've been watching them like a hawk. One of the things that I've been observing is snails. Now, I'm simply taking those snails and putting them into another area in the garden, taking them away from the garden, and that seems to be helping. But if we're talking about roly-polies or pill bugs or, some of those other ground-dwelling recyclers that are part of the soil food web, but can be detrimental to tender seedlings, diatomaceous earth sprinkled in a barrier, even on the young seedling, can be really effective because those insects will get on it and they just won't like it. So diatomaceous earth, or DE as it's often referred to, I think it's a safe and practical application in the garden to use in a measured way. And you can also consider lures and traps. Something as simple as taking like a banana peel or half of a grapefruit and placing it away from your young tender seedlings to, draw in some of these pests overnight they'll be attracted to that food waste and they'll be feeding on it away from your tender seedlings. So you could probably consider using that in combination with some of those other ideas that I mentioned, and hopefully that will help you be successful. Okay, last question here from GCCat. This one is a doozy. I don't understand the different types of onions. Long day, short day. In Central Texas, do we always plant short day in the spring, or at different times of year do we plant different kinds? Also, can you explain the different terminologies of onion sets versus onion slips? Okay, let's break this down. I've got a couple of videos on my YouTube channel about growing onions here in Central Texas. They will be really good if you go back and watch those. I can drop the link in the description here. The answer to this question is you're going to have the best results when you grow short day varieties. These only require 10 to 11 daylight hours to trigger them to bulb, and then they're going to mature over a period of several weeks. So that's going to clue us in on, what is the best time of year to plant them. And that is January, early January. That's when nurseries will have their onion sets. I'm going to go over that part of the question soon. They will have them and you want to get them growing in the ground, and then they will be triggered to bulb about, March. Right now we're hitting 12 hours in day length. So they'll start to size up into the month of April and May. They will get soft necks, fall over, and are essentially ready to be cured and harvested at that point. You don't want them being pushed into the hotter months because they have a shallow root system. It'll be difficult for them to not be stressed. But to give you the whole picture, intermediate varieties require 12 to 13 hours of daylight, which is going to start around April. And then long day varieties need 12 to 16 hours of daylight. And we only top out at about 14 hours of daylight in July or August. And that's not when you want your bulbing onions growing and developing. It's just nuclear out there, right? So bottom line, in the South, it's best to grow short day variety onions. Now let's talk about the terminology associated with these onions. First of all, onion sets, onion slips, they are not botanical specific names. They are general terms. They're very confusing. Both terms are used for different things in different growing regions. For example, here in southern growing regions, we typically refer to our onion sets, which is a bundle of like 60 to 75 bare root dormant onion plants. And those are the perfect size to get planted out in the garden early January, and you can be successful just like that. However, you take the same term in a northern growing zone where they have a shorter growing season. All right, they need to grow long day varieties. They get onion sets. They come in a little bag a lot of times, and they're like little bulb onions, almost like little boiler onions. That's what they look like. But that's how they grow them and propagate them, but they're still referred to as the same thing. Onion slips, I don't know about that one. If you research, you will see them, the terminology used interchangeably. So it's confusing to us. Also, you can check out DixondaleFarms.com. That's a great resource there in Texas. That's where the onion sets that I grow come from, and you can find additional information on their website. Thanks so much to everyone who submitted a question for today's show. I want to encourage you to get out there and experiment in your garden. You need to get to know the microclimate. What are the boundaries? Push those boundaries. Here in Central Texas, I think it really is advantageous to have some shade on the southwest horizon. In my garden, I have pretty full sun, generally 8 hours until about 3 o'clock. Then it starts to creep over from the southwest corner because I've got some trees over there, but it's pretty hot. Broadleafy greens can be grown deeper into the season with a little bit of shade in that area or some dappled light in some circumstances, but you're going to have to get to know your garden because what works in your garden might not work in my garden, and that's part of the process. And seek out crop varieties with greater heat tolerance. There are some out there. You can get to know your growing region, your local growers, and they'll have some solid recommendations for you. And I mentioned seed saving earlier. If you can begin to select the strongest plants that do well in our growing conditions and save seeds from season to season, eventually you'll come up with a pool of genetics that are better adapted to growing in your garden. And like I said, your garden is different from my garden, is different from someone growing in Wisconsin or Southern California. Embrace diversity in your garden and try a few lesser known crops. I'm really keen on those warm season greens, things like Molokia, also known as Egyptian spinach. That one is just really ironclad through the Texas heat. Also, edible gourds. These are a great alternative to squash. I have the squash vine borer pretty bad, so you have to go to great lengths to, put up a physical barrier to keep those moths from getting to the plants. However, if you're growing loofah or Kukuzi, that's another variety of edible gourd, you harvest them at an immature state and they will taste remarkably like zucchini without the pest issues. So give that a shot. I'm also experimenting with chayote. It just goes to show you never know until you try. And I might not be successful, but this is a plant that has edible leaves and shoots. And if it gets some fruit, it's a bonus. And what about those cucumber melons? They don't get bitter in the heat. There are numerous varieties to choose from, all kind of crop diversity there, all kind of history and people connected to them. And that's a really great way to move through a gardening practice. I got to mention long beans too. These are the way to go. You grow them up a trellis. They can take the heat. They'll put on round after round. They may go a little bit dormant during the hottest part of the summer, and you can plant more, or they may perk back up heading into fall. So similar how I grow winter crops into early spring, once springtime rolls around, I typically gear up for an early summer garden. And this past week, I planted some of my favorite crops out into the garden, and I was out there earlier today starting to see some of them sprout. If you've been inspired, please share this podcast. Let me know your takeaways, leave me a question for future episodes, or request a consultation by emailing scott@newgardenroad.com. And remember, you can grow your own food. Keep it organic.